This video is made possible by my patrons on Patreon. Hello everyone, my name is Ziamaro and welcome to Battlerite Sage. I know it's been a while, but let's get back to doing some Battlerite analysis. Today's gameplay comes from one of my patrons, Houston, or as he's known in game, TheExpelledSage. I've actually analysed some of his gameplay before and he asked if I could look at another game. Usually I wouldn't do reviews for the same person multiple times, but he's been a long time supporter of the channel and he actually sent me quite an interesting game. As always, keep comments constructive. If you have advice, feel free to pitch in, but just keep it civil. Honestly, I've never actually had any issues with people being toxic in the comments of these videos, but it's still worth saying. Last time we looked at one of Houston's games, it was a casual 3v3 game and he had a bit of an issue with tanking lots of damage and only really healing himself. Well, I'm happy to say that that's not really an issue now. You healed your teammate plenty and you used your shields pretty well too. Today's game is a ranked 2v2 game, so the dynamic is quite different from last time. As I said, you've improved at your healing and support capabilities, so really well done on sorting that out. There are two things that I think could use a little work. One is your aim and the other is counter timing. There are no obvious trends or bad habits to this. Some of the counters you make are really well timed and others are not so well timed. Honestly though, that's something you can kind of just analyze for yourself. Watch your games back and figure out when would be a good time to counter, when was not such a good time to counter. There is one thing that I'm going to focus on for this video though, and this is something you did a lot in the last game you sent me as well, so clearly it's a bad habit that you've had for a while. And that habit is spacing aggressively. Pearl is a really strong champion, particularly in 2v2. But an often forgotten fact about Pearl is that she only has access to one iframe. You can take the right that resets your space when you dive into a bubble, which you do have, but besides that, Pearl is kinda like Lucy. She's vulnerable to uncounterable AoE damage, which includes a lot of ultimates. That's actually one of Pearl's main weaknesses that your enemy is probably looking to exploit. Pearl has a really varied kit and lots of ways to deal with different types of abilities. Your bubble can slow down projectiles, your counter can stop rook charges and things like that, you have a shield, you have spammable silencers, and of course you have your space. But if you blow your space, all it takes is one Ashka ultimate to really mess you up, and you have nothing left in your kit besides maybe a shield to mitigate that. And there are actually a lot of abilities that can take advantage of this weakness. I mean, here's a list of champions with ultimates that will really mess you up when you have no space. Bako, Raigon, Freya, Croak, Thorn, Ashka, Varesh, Esmo, Alicia, Destiny, Lucy, Sirius, Paloma, Alder, Pearl, and one of the champions you're against in this game, Rook. Yes, I know, that's a lot of champions. That's actually 60% of the champion roster who can potentially destroy you after your space is down. And let's not forget that regular abilities can ignore counters, such as Bako's Incap, Ashka's Q-Stun, Alicia's Flash Freeze, and again, one of the champions you're against here, Ivor's Flamethrower. So, as you may have noticed, I'm not doing this analysis the way I normally would, where I just do a play-by-play while watching your footage. I've had people say in the past that they'd like to see a little more detailed analysis, and I feel like a good way of doing that is to take one aspect of the gameplay and really focus on it. So guys, in the comments, let me know if you prefer this format to the Battlerite analysis. Anyway, here's the problem I'm seeing with your gameplay. Quite often, you're putting a bubble down and then aggressively spacing into it, presumably to get a mouse 1 charge to silence the enemy. Now, don't get me wrong, the space reset is a strong right, but using it to get a silence charge is very risky. There are a number of times where you space into a really bad position to get the space reset and then immediately have to space away again, meaning you have no iframe left. A lot of opponents will take full advantage of that. Looking through the footage, half of the time that you space into a bubble, it turns out to be either a good decision or a neutral one. But the other half, it's actually a bad decision that you've made. Sometimes you might make a risky play and it turns out badly, but you don't want that to be happening 50% of the time. So just to demonstrate something quickly, if you're using bubble reset just to get a silence charge, you might be better off using EX Mouse 1. Sure, it costs 25 energy, but if you hit the silence and the follow-up mouse 1, you'll get 14 energy back anyway. Not only that, but if you're in a good position, you'll remain in a good position. Plus you still have bubble and space for when you need them. So even though you won this game, if you switched every time you spaced badly for an EX Mouse 1, you would have had a much more comfortable victory. Okay, with that in mind, let's take a look at the times when you spaced into a bubble. First, let's take a look at the times where it turned out well and why that was a good decision. In this example, it looks like the rook is gonna charge you. He doesn't actually charge at you, but you reset your space by diving into the bubble. And the reason that's a good decision is that you're actually using your space to avoid something, so that's good. In the second example, you dive into the bubble to get a silence for the ult combo, which I think is an acceptable use of the reset. Because obviously, if you've used your ultimate, you have no energy for an EX Mouse 1, so the only way you're going to get a silence charge is by spacing. So this is fine. Then again, in this one, you go into the bubble to avoid a rook charge. Again, you're actually avoiding an ability here. This one turned out okay because you're at least not spacing into the rook, but you weren't really avoiding any damage, so even though it turned out okay, it still is a bit of a risky play. And then there's a few times where you use your space to chase down an Ivor, which again, I think is an okay decision. So what's the trend for well-timed space resets? There are times where an aggressive space reset will work out well. One of those times is for an ult combo like we saw. There are other times where it might be a good idea, but as a general rule of thumb, you probably should just avoid it for now. So until you're more experienced and you know when you'll get enough value out of an aggressive space reset, I would stick to just using it to avoid abilities. Now let's move on to some of the times where it didn't work out so well for you. So first example here, you space right towards a rook and then you're forced to use your space again, so you now have no iframe and you're actually forced to use all your other cooldowns, which is not a position you want to be in. And then same thing with this one, you space into the rook, you hit his counter, which is unfortunate, and you're forced to use your space again, leaving you with no iframe. Now this one is a particularly bad one. Against a rook, you do not want to put yourself between the rook and the wall because you're going to get incapped, which you do. And this example kind of illustrates another problem with constantly resetting your space with a bubble. If instead you'd waited with that bubble, you could have put it in the Ivor's face and completely denied her ultimate. There are a few other examples where you space right into the rook and then you're forced to use your space again. In this case, you don't actually get punished because they don't really have anything to punish you with. So this time you got lucky, but there's one other reason that you don't want to use your space reset in this way. And that is because it's very predictable. As you can see here, you space in, the rook predicts it and hits you in the face with his right click. And especially with the new rook buffs, that's not something you really want to do against a rook. So in conclusion, there are times where it's okay to aggressively space. And this is something that experienced pearls will make a lot of use out of. So keep working at it, but until you're a little more experienced, try to be a little more reserved with your space usage. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please feel free to subscribe for more Battlerite guides, news and discussion. If you'd like to help support the channel and get some unique rewards, then head over to patreon.com/battleritesage. And don't forget to check out twitch.tv/battleritesage. Until next time, thank you for watching and I'll see you soon.